Okay, let's get started. All right. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about the slippery, slippery, slippery slope that is over editing. And a lot of noobs, including myself, did this in the beginning. And I still catch myself from time to time doing it, to be honest with you. So we're going to get into I don't know how many things it is. It's a couple of things. So we're going to get into the top 3 things. God, look at that finger. Let me use this one. The top 3 things that you should certainly address to limit your over editing. When you first start learning the software that is Lightroom, Capture One, you're going to see all kinds of sliders that you may not know, graphs that you may not understand, and terms that you've never heard of. And you're going to be overwhelmed. Let's just be honest, you're going to be overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. A lot of us are. It takes some time to really grasp these concepts and techniques. And you're going to make changes in Lightroom and in Capture One, and you're going to look at your image at the end and be like, what in the hell is this? You're going to. Trust me, I did. Everyone does. And that's because you got to understand what these various things do. And there's 3 of them that I'm going to really harp on today that you shouldn't be making a lot of adjustments to, or at least in the beginning, and at least at the start of an edit. So let's get into it. Number 1, contrast. You can tell when someone's applied too much contrast to a photo. And there are other sliders that actually make contrast adjustments. So you have to be very careful when using the contrast slider. Do not start by cranking that up at the beginning of a photo edit. Maybe not at first glance you won't notice the issues when you first get into your edit. But the more you look at it, the more unnatural it starts to look. I know when you crank the contrast slider up, it starts to look crisp and you think, oh my goodness, this looks so much better. Once you start to adjust your exposure and your saturation and your tone curve, your contrast is going to start to look unnatural and over edited. You should never adjust your contrast at the beginning of a photo edit. All right, let's talk about number 2. Number 2, clarity and texture. And I group these into one because they're usually on the same place in Lightroom, along with the dehaze adjustment. That is probably the most overused sliders or set of sliders in Lightroom, in my opinion, when I look at other people's photos. So what is clarity and texture? When I first discovered this, I was like a kid in a candy store. Like contrast, it made the photo pop more. You could see the deep micro details. It made it more like 3D. But it does this by adjusting the contrast in the midtones, further increasing the contrast that you've already adjusted in step 1 or in issue 1. Then the texture increases the contrast in the details, more contrast. After you've made all those badass contrast adjustments, now you got way too much contrast, which will make your photo look fake, unnatural, generated. No bueno, no bueno. Let's move on to the 3rd most overused slider, saturation. Making global saturation adjustments was something I used to do all the time. These days I almost always have my saturation though at a negative number, not a positive number, and my vibrance setting at a positive number. So I use the saturation to offset some of the vibrance, and let's talk about why. Adjusting the saturation globally is almost always a bad idea. Often it can screw up your white balance, for example, by adjusting the oranges up too much. It'll bring up the colors on parts of your photos that you don't need to bring up the colors to. Saturation adjusts all colors up or down, but vibrance makes adjustments to the least dominant colors. It can bring a small amount of warmth to a photo without making it look like something AI generated or a cartoon. If I were to give you any advice, I would say adjust your vibrance up or your saturation down to offset anything that the vibrance may have screwed up in your photo. And this kind of brings us back to an overall theme to make small regional adjustments. Your global adjustments should only be done really to white balance or exposure if you need to get it dialed in correctly. I wouldn't make any contrast or textures or clarity adjustments. If you ask me honestly, I turn my contrast, my texture, and my clarity down on every single photo I take because I like more of a filmic look. It took picking up my Nikon FE and getting back into film photography to really understand that if it can't stand on its own, it's probably not worth the edit. Maybe. All right, bonus tip. Another thing I learned while shooting film is the importance of getting the horizon straight and the composition correct in camera. Now, this may not be as big of an issue when you're doing digital photography, but adjusting your geometry often causes you to have to crop your photo. And that might just cut out important pieces of your composition, whether it's just negative space or a part of the photo that you don't want cut out. It'll change your composition, and it'll make you need to make sure you account for this. A lot of people who shoot on digital will shoot a little wider than they intend to so that they can make those adjustments and crop in just slightly. I'm hoping I can cut this down to like a 5-minute video because it shouldn't be that long. So to recap, contrast, clarity, texture, saturation. These digital photos are so crisp these days, especially with these high resolution sensors like the 40 megapixel sensor on this Fuji MI-X-T5 and my X100V or 6, my X106 for that matter. You really don't, they're so crisp, they're so detailed that, in my opinion, making any adjustments positive to contrast, texture, and clarity just over sharpens the, and sharpness for that matter, just over sharpens the photo just way too much. I would recommend you turn those down. And I wouldn't recommend adjusting them until at the end of your photo. Get your exposure and your white balance right. Let's start with that. Make regional adjustments to your color or light. Then look at your saturation, your vibrance. I would turn your vibrance up and your saturation down to offset if your vibrance if needed. I would turn your clarity and your texture and your contrast down as well, but do save those for the very last. Don't start with those in the beginning, and your photos will start looking a lot less over edited. All right, guys, that's it for this week. I will see you next week with another video. Peace. The software and your journey through digital photography, as you continue to learn the software, and you, I'm telling you, oh, I wish you guys knew how much of a stutter that I had, and you would appreciate some of the time when I get the actual sentence out correctly. Let me start over. As you continue to learn, you're going to crank up these various knobs and sliders and switches, and you're going to think that they're making your image much. With that, let's get started. I'm going to film all of that over again.